Good morning, everyone. And it's actually evening over here in Melbourne, so great to see everyone. So first and foremost, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone in this room, and hello to you, George, as well. I can see you, as well as many other guests. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for taking the time and doing whatever it takes to invest in your own personal and professional success. And I just want to say a big thank you to the Iconic Offices team for helping to create this platform and this opportunity for us to come together to learn. So it's going to be really exciting. So just strap yourselves up, sit at the edge of your seat, because there's a lot of things which we're going to cover today. So leadership, developing resilient and adaptable teams. If we look around in the world, we live in very changing, challenging, and interesting times. So resilience and adaptability, it's not just nice to have, it's actually a must have. And we're going to talk about some ways in which you can create teams and groups which are not only high performing, but also very nimble and agile as well. But before we jump into the juicy parts of today's materials, just a few housekeeping rules. The first and foremost, which is most important, is that this is a safe environment. All right, so feel free to engage, ask questions, take down notes, unmute yourself if you want towards the end, pop in your questions into the chat as well, because we're all here to learn from one another. The next thing is to take down notes. So I have a good old hard copy notebook here. If you have an an old school physical analog book, you can use that to take down notes as well. Or if you prefer the digital mode, you can pop it in your smartphone or your tablet. So you don't have to take down notes from the slides. What you want to take down are actually like little nuggets or revelation or insights which you've come across, because you don't want to miss those moments. Sometimes we might talk about an idea, we might go down a different path, and we've uncovered different insights and amazing things. So you want to capture those moments for yourself. All right. So do engage, do stay engaged, and at the end of the day, you only get out what you put in. All right, so I'm sure everyone has come here with a degree of hunger and expectancy, so we're in for a lot of things. Okay, so the first question is, where are you tuning in from? So this is your first activity, to pop stuff into the chat box. So just pop in where you are tuning in from. All right, so we can see, let's see if, so I'm expecting most to be from Dublin, but Kelly's from Scotland, Jenna, Manchester, Shona, Cambridge, George from England, Hui Xin from Malaysia, Tullamore, that's where Richard is. We've got Dublin as well. Cool. So we've got people from all over the world. So thanks so much for joining us wherever you are and whatever the time zone you're in. So it's about 10 p.m. in Melbourne time, which is close to the bedtime for many people. But I just want to tell you that I'm really excited. I got my cup of coffee already. I took a 5-10 minute nap before this, just to make sure that I'm refreshed. So never too early, never too late to invest in our success. So thanks so much for sharing your location. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is, as we go along in the materials, if we've come across an idea or a concept which comes to you as an insight or revelation, feel free to pop in AHA into the chat box. All right, and pop in OMG if it is something that is a rude awakening, kind of like a wake-up call, or a tight slap to the face, something which you realize that you haven't been doing correctly, or a reality check. All right, so sometimes we might be learning something for the first time. We didn't see it the way it is before, so it might actually shock the system, which can be a good thing. So just feel free to pop in either AHA or OMG. Okay, so about myself, let me just share with you a little bit of my background, if you're wondering who's this person presenting to you from the other side of the world. So I was born in Singapore, and then I came over to Melbourne to do my postgrad studies, and I've been working and living in Melbourne for the past 10 years. So had a chance to speak on the TEDx stage a few years back in Melbourne, and before the world went into lockdown, I had a chance to travel to different parts of the world, around 12 countries, 12 plus cities, just to share, just to preach the message of success, growth, greatness, and resilience. My story has been featured on various media outlets: Entrepreneur, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald. Back in Singapore, because national service was compulsory, I served as in the infantry. And then outside of that, I'm also an author, an ultra marathoner as well. And during COVID, I've been investing a lot in my financial education. So I'm doing a lot of stock and derivatives trading. And apart from that, I've also coached different clients from companies like EY, Deloitte, and ANZ Bank. So, and just this slide is some of the exciting adventures which I've been up to previously. So you can see different companies, different organizations, different settings, different cultures as well. So as much as I'm talking a lot today, it's all about learning from one another, because it's always a privilege and pleasure to meet new people, to come across new ideas and insights as well. Because there's a lot of talk about diversity, which is really important, but diversity not only in terms of race, ethnicity, or nationality, but also diversity in experiences, diversity in insights, diversity in ideas, diversity in perspectives, all right? Because it is all these differences which can somehow make us stronger. Right? Because if we all think the same, then what is the point? Right? We need to challenge ourselves and continuously upgrade and improve the way we think. So the juicy bits for today. So we're going to cover 5 things, and definitely we'll try to make some time for questions and answers. So the first one is why talk about resilience and adaptability. Number 2 is this thing I call the Maslow check-in. So we've heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we're going to talk about that as to how you can use that as a self-awareness tool for your team. Number 3 is the gap analysis. So bridging the gap between where you are right now and where you want your team to be. And number 4, the art of execution. And number 5, which is one of my most favorite, is building self-disrupting teams. All right. So self-disruption before self-destruction. All right. If you're taking down notes, better to disrupt yourself than to let something or someone else disrupt you. All right. So how can you constantly disrupt yourself so that you stay on the cutting edge? Cool. So the first one, why resilience and adaptability, is because if we look at the world is very different. All right. The world is always evolving. It seems more dramatic than a TV series. There's always something going on. There's never a dull moment. And we can also see that the world is becoming more and more intertwined and interconnected. So things that happen on the other side of the globe, relative to where you are, can have a profound and a ripple effect to where you are. So something that's happening on the other side of the world can somehow influence your daily lives even. All right, so coronavirus, the protests and riots, Black Lives Matter, and also that in Hong Kong, the US elections, the Wall Street crash last year and all that. So all this have ripple and profound impacts, possibly to our daily lives as well. So we can see that the world is becoming more and more complex. There's a lot more moving parts right now. The next thing is this, which is really interesting. So the rate of change is not only increasing, it's not increasing linearly, it's actually increasing exponentially. All right, so the pace of change is becoming even faster. And we can see here, these are different technological marvels, different inventions, or maybe goods and services as well. And you can see there's a timestamp below that. So that is actually the amount of time it takes for that product or service to acquire 50 million users. So for example, airlines, 68 years to reach 50 million travelers. For the television, 22 years to reach 50 million viewers. Facebook, YouTube, 3 years, 4 years respectively. Pokemon Go, 19 days, all right? So we can see the rate of adoption is really increasing. Barriers of entry to creating mobile or digital or technological platforms are dropping. So a lot of people can enter the market, which is good for people who are passionate about entrepreneurship, but it could also be a threat to existing incumbents and existing businesses who have been there for a while, right? So the whole playing field is always changing and evolving. this is something which is very dear to my heart. So 2017, I had a chance to run a physical face-to-face resilience workshop for the finance and brokerage team over in the National Australia Bank, their Melbourne branch. So you can see there, it was really a great time. The employees sat in different teams, different groups, and there were a lot of group activities as well. So we were having a lot of laughs and all that. So I did this in about, I think, November 2017. And interestingly enough, a few weeks after that event, this was what I saw in the news. All right. So NAB, National Australia Bank, has announced to cut 6,000 jobs over the next 3 years in order to lift its profit to that amount. All right. So it wasn't something which we were expecting. It wasn't something which we were kind of anticipating. So a lot of people were just going about their lives and their jobs like business as usual, and then suddenly this happened. So I found it really interesting that we did the resilience workshop and then this kind of happened. So the moral of the story is that resilience is not just a career skill, it is a life skill, because you never know what life could throw you around the corner, or you never know what could appear around the corner. So it's always important to be on your toes, always important to be as nimble as possible, so that if things do happen, you're able to pick yourself up as quickly as possible. All right. So this is why resilience and agility and adaptability is so important. The next one is this. It's the Maslow check-in. All right. So who here has heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So pop it in, pop your response into the chat box if you've heard of this before. So Audrey, yes. Thanks so much. Kate, yes. Amy, yes. Okay, beautiful. So this isn't too foreign for too many people, but for those who are not too familiar with this, let me just go through it briefly. So the Maslow hierarchy of needs is basically a tiered structure to talk about the different needs, basically the different needs which we all have. All right. So starting at the baseline, what we have are physiological needs. So we needing air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. All right. So this is pretty much the baseline requirements for our fundamental survival. All right. Because without this, there is no life. Okay, so once this is established, all right, then we tend to look for the next level of needs. So we elevate ourselves to the next level. All right, so that is when we look out for safety needs. All right, so personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. So once you have food in your stomach, then you look to have a roof over your head, a bed to sleep on, to a certain extent, to be in a safe environment. All right, either yourself as a person or with your family. So it's just your safety needs. And then the next level will be love and belonging. So friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. So this is where you have meaningful relationships with the people around you. So you can see we are actually building on top of the foundations. All right, love and belonging. That is level 3. And then level 4 is esteem. So respect, status, self-efficacy, self-concept, recognition, strength, freedom, personal branding, being proud of your work and all that. So you can see we're starting to become more and more aspirational. So once that is established, the next level will be self-actualization. So the desire to become the most that you can be. So this is when we start to become, we'll touch on things like spirituality, like your life's calling, your life's mission, becoming the best version of yourself, living life to the fullest, and dying without regrets. All right. So you can see what this means is basically we got to start at the bottom and then we build our way to the top. And we can't really reach the top if the foundations are shaky, because as long as the foundations are being threatened, we tend to revert back to that which is at risk, to address it first before we build up ourselves from there. So in a sense, what we can conclude from this is that this hierarchy not only shows what people are looking for, all right, not in terms of their aspirations and their goals, not just that, but also where they are operating from. So their current state of mind. Okay, so which means that a higher stage requires a higher state. Okay, so let me say this again. A higher stage requires a higher state. So what this means is that if we look back at those 5 tiers, all right, physiological needs, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. If we can see the bottom one, lower state of mind, and all the way at the top is the higher state of mind. So whenever you are dealing with people in maybe like a challenging situation, if you look at your team, it's really important to put yourself in their shoes and to see where they are coming from. All right, because if people are operating at a lower level, it's actually quite hard to get them to see the bigger picture. I mean, it's not impossible, but there are more obstacles and hurdles to go through. Right. So for example, like yourself, all right, if you had a tough day at work, all right, you know you're hungry, you're tired, maybe someone has cut your lane on traffic and all that, your state of mind tends to be lowered. All right, because you just want to go home, you just want to have your dinner, you just want to go back to the comforts of your family and your home and all that. So uh, in that sense, you're thinking on a lower level. That is your lower self speaking. So you can be very primal, sometimes very triggered in a sense. All right. But once you actually satisfy those needs, all right, once you actually calm yourself down, or you put things into perspective, then you can slowly elevate yourself to a higher state of mind. Then you can start to see things more strategically. You can start to put things into perspective. All right. So lower state activities, they tend to be these kinds of things. So repetitive and menial tasks. All right. So doing things which don't really require that much brain and processing power. Focus on self. So just focusing on your immediate needs is all centered around your universe, you in your little bubble and all that. Being on the defensive. All right. So you just protecting what you have. All right, playing it safe because you're worried about having too many things at stake. Small thinking, because if you operate on a lower level, you tend to think very small. All right. So can I get through the day? Can I get through this minute? Can we survive? All right. Can we make it through to the other side? And decisions tend to be driven by impulse and immediate satisfaction. All right. So this tends to be when a person or team is operating on a very primal stage. All right. So you're being just in survival mode. Right. So lower state activities. But on the flip side, higher state activities. So when teams are operating from a higher level, all right, they're thinking from a higher state of mind, they tend to focus more on strategic moves and innovative work. All right, they can actually do more meaningful work, things that actually move the needle forward. They tend to focus more on others and the mission as well, because their immediate needs are already satisfied. So they're looking to come from a position of service. All right, they are more on the offense because they know that um, there are there's the status quo to challenge. They can actually go out there to make things happen. All right, they're going for it. They think big. They're driven by purpose and delayed gratification. All right, so instead of being driven by impulse and your immediate needs, all right, they're driven by their purpose, their mission, and in a way, you're willing to delay your immediate needs for the bigger gain at the end of the day. All right. So this is something which you can use to check in with your team. So if you're leading a team, if you're managing a team, or if you're in a part of a team that is going through a challenging period. So for example, when you're going through a restructuring or change of management or change of leadership and all that, always take a moment, take a step back, pause, and assess where your team is at. So are people operating um, at the very bottom level? So are they just concerned about just getting by and all that? If so, that is perfectly fine. All right. It's all about acknowledging where they are, meet those needs as much as you can, and then you can slowly elevate the team. All right. But if they have already moved up in that pyramid, then you can move on to the next level from there. All right, so this pretty much serves as, you can use this as a gauge. All right, so question we can ask ourselves is, what is the state of mind of your team right now? All right, 0 being very low, that means they're just concerned about mere survival, just getting by, just getting through this and all that. And then 10 on the other extreme, whereby they are focused on transformation for impact, influence, legacy, making a difference, making a dent. All right. So some days it might fluctuate. Sometimes when people are really stressed, it might tend to be like on on level 2 or level 3. But when people are energized, when people are realigned with their mission, you can actually bring them from 6 to 7 to 8 and so on and so forth. All right. So you can use this as a gauge. All right. So the next one, which is really interesting, is this thing called the gap analysis. So the gap analysis is basically for you to really analyze the state of the current affairs right now compared to where you want to be. So in a nutshell, the gap is the space between where you are and where you want to be. All right. So we can always say that life can be measured in terms of gaps. All right. So whether so some people, they have a physical gap, like if you have an ideal weight, if you have an ideal level of health and fitness which you want to attain, there is obviously a gap. All right. Some people have a financial gap, or they have a career gap. So where you are right now is not really where you truly desire to be, or where you feel that you are utilizing your fullest potential. So there is a gap, and that is fine, because if there is no gap, then are we really growing and challenging ourselves? All right. So there are different types of gaps which we need to be aware of, and the nature of the gaps will determine the type of action you take to address the gaps. So let me just share with you some examples of the gaps. All right. So the first kind of gap is the mission gap. All right. So lack of vision, lack of purpose, not being aware of the mission, not being aware of why we are doing what we're doing. So sometimes in the busyness of things, when people become very complacent, this can actually set in. So we kind of like lose track of why we really exist in the first place. We lose track of our love and obsession for our customers. We lose track of why we're in the relationship in the first place. So sometimes things can creep in, sometimes we can slowly stray away. All right, and the gap widens, mission gap. The next one is the skills gap, which is very obvious. All right. So the lack of expertise, the lack of qualifications, like the lack of programming competencies, the lack of communication skills, and all that. So we can see that as we go into the digital age, this is becoming more and more pronounced. All right. So there's a huge gap between what the fourth industrial revolution requires and what society has, or even what the education system is churning out right now. So there's a huge gap between education and employment. Right. The next one is the resource gap. So if your team wants to service regional clients, or if your team wants to scale or expand its operations, maybe there's a gap in terms of its resources. Could be human resources, could be equipment, could be technology, could be finances. All right. So that is a kind of gap to be aware of. The next one is the knowledge gap. So lack of literacy, lack of awareness, lack of understanding. So not because we don't know what we don't know. So it's being aware of the blind spots which we have. So if you're entering a new market, some of the knowledge gaps would be you're not aware of the local tax laws, you're not aware of the local regulations, you're not aware of the cultural nuances, all right, if you're operating in a regional market. And number 5, the connection gap. So the lack of networks, all right. So maybe you don't know who, if there's a person in that area who can actually help you out. So that missing link, that missing connection. So it could be not knowing who could guide you, who could train you, who could mentor you as well. So there's a connection gap. All right. And the last one, which is the most interesting and the most understated even, is this thing called the character gap. Lack of maturity, lack of confidence, all right, lack of experience. All right, because sometimes if young people have been given too much responsibilities or too much power, even though they might have all the skills, the resources, and knowledge, if they lack the character, things can go astray. And we've seen that before. Even for us, you might experience this yourself as well. So like if someone has risen into power really quickly, and if they don't know how to manage that power, then things can go haywire very easily, right? So got to be careful of the character gap. And I have seen that before. I've seen teams where they promote someone too early in the process, and that person doesn't have the humility to be able to conduct themselves well and to be able to exercise empathy to their colleagues and their coworkers. And if that person is just throwing their weight around, they start to be very cocky and arrogant. So we can see that's a clear character gap. Okay. Beautiful. So let me give you some examples. So what you can do, the framework which you can use is very simple. So your current state, your future state, the gap, and then the action. So current state is where you are right now, seeing the problem for what it is. The future state is pretty much your desired outcome. And then the gap is what is missing, and the action is what you can do about it to address and to bridge the gap. So for example, so maybe you're saying that currently right now I'm having low energy, you know, dragging my feet to work, not knowing what I'm doing, and maybe I'm putting a bit of weight as well because you're in the lockdown, things are really comfortable. Your commute is just your walk, the walk from your bedroom to your living room, uh, and all that. So in terms of your calories expenditure has dropped dramatically, and also you have been taking a lot of ordering a lot of food through delivery and all that. So that has definitely had a physical impact on yourself, right? So maybe that is something which you are encountering right now. However, your future state, you want to make an impact at work. You want to do meaningful work in your job. You want to excel in your career. You want to have the good health and energy. Right? So that is your desired future state. So what could be the gap? So for instance, the gap here could be the mission gap. All right. So maybe you're not really seeing how you can make a difference in your work. Maybe you're not really seeing how you actually fit, how your role fits in the team, and with the bigger overall objectives of the department, for example. All right. And maybe there's also a character gap, which means that maybe you're not really valuing your health and you're just going for the easy wins or your immediate satisfaction. So whenever you feel like you had a long day at work, you just want to sit down on the couch, right? So you're just fulfilling your immediate needs at that point of time, all right, without thinking of the implied consequences. Okay. So with this in mind, what you can do is, for instance, get a professional mentor and get a personal trainer. So it's starting to get really practical. So finding someone where you can talk about your life direction. So maybe you're feeling a bit aimless or a bit lost at the moment, and then talk about your career plans, the different pathways you can take in your job. All right. Um, so in terms of the action steps, more specifically, to have accountability meetings twice a month and to exercise in the morning 3 times per week. All right. So this is where you kind of like go into your SMART goals and your SMART actions to have accountability and all that. So we'll talk about that in more detail in the next section. So the next example, right? So for this one, maybe it's more in a business setting. So our sales team is getting comfortable and complacent. Maybe you as a manager, you're seeing that your team members are getting really, really relaxed. All right. So sales numbers are still okay, but you're concerned about the future, all right, whether they can still bring in the results and outcomes to stay competitive. Okay, so your desired future state is you want a team that is constantly disrupting and challenging itself, constantly innovating, constantly pushing boundaries and owning its space. Maybe you also want it to have an increase in revenue, maybe 5 to 10% per month or per quarter as you go along. And then as you dig deeper in analyzing your team, you might have realized that there are gaps. There are glaring gaps. So character gap. So some are getting cocky. Some of them are really, really becoming very complacent and actually cutting corners. They're looking for the easy way out. Maybe some of them, they feel that they've been there in the company for a long time. They are thinking that they are a big shot. They can do whatever they want, not knowing that in life and business, disruption could just be around the corner. All right, there could be a skills gap because some of them are really comfortable in their old ways and are a bit hesitant in um, reskilling and upskilling themselves. Right, there could be a connection gap. So you're still pretty much tapping into the same customer segment. Maybe you're over harvesting the existing customer segment. So there could be opportunities to expand into new markets. Right, so different gaps in this case. And then for the actions, right? So what you could do as a departmental activity is to do a SWOT analysis together. So looking at your team objectively, putting all emotions aside. All right. So looking at its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. All right. And then observing what are some of the best practices in your industry and in your space, and what other winning teams are doing. Right, and seeing what you can learn from them. And then practically, maybe it's also about attending 2 times more industry events or making 2 times more the calls and customer outreaches. All right, so that you can start to break into newer customer segments. All right, so basically, um, the gap analysis is looking at so laying down the current state. So whatever you feel that whatever problem or challenges or issues you are seeing right now. And then the future state is laying down your ideal outcomes or the desired results which you want to achieve. And then the gap is what is actually stopping you, or what are some of the root causes that are preventing you from achieving the future state. All right, because if there are no gaps, you would already be in your future state. All right, so obviously there is a gap, and then the action to breach the gap. Okay, cool. So the next part, which I want to talk about, is this thing called the art of execution. All right, so this is something which I've used in my teams, with my clients as well. So the reason why execution is so important is because anyone can talk a big game. At the end of the day, we live in a world that is overly saturated with information. All right, there is never ever a shortage of information. The shortage is usually on the implementation. All right, so um, there is easy access to information, articles, resources, podcasts, blogs, and all that content and all that. That is never the problem. The problem is actually applying what you have learned, what you have heard, and all that. So this is really important because even if you have charted a strong, compelling vision for your team, you have laid down the plans and all that, but if you don't really track its progress, people can go astray very easily. All right. So today's date is the 10th of March. All right. It's already March. All right. And it feels like yesterday was New Year's Day. So can anyone tell me, what do people set on New Year's Day? So feel free to pop it into the chat box. 1st of January, what do people set, or what are people really excited about on the first day of the new year? All right. Cool. So resolutions, exactly. So resolutions, goals, New Year's resolutions, definitely. So everyone's really excited and pumped up on New Year's Day because new year, new you, new year, new body, new year, new career, new year, new possibilities, and all that. So, but the statistics are actually really shocking because by February, 80% have already failed. And if you want to know the percentage of people who actually fulfill the resolutions at the end of the year, it's only 8%. All right, so that's a very, very high attrition rate. Um, so we can see that if people are left to their own devices, it's hard for people to stay on track because we are all human. We are all imperfect. We are all we have the lazy and um, lower level cells, which is really primal, which is really lazy, which just want the easy way out. So there's always a tug of war between the flesh and the spirit. All right. So the flesh just wants the easy way out, just sit down, wait for the weekends, have things come our way. But the spirit is the aspirational and transformational one. So every day, for example, if you want to work on your health and fitness, you will always have to manage the tug of war between your carnal flesh and your ambitious spirit that wants to get things into shape and get things into order. All right. So this is something which you can use. All right. And I found this really useful. It is called the art of execution, and the art, ART, it stands for three things. All right. So accountability, reporting, and tracking. Very important. All right. So accountability, um, it means who are they or yourself accountable to. All right. So because if there's someone who is looking out for you, and there's someone who demands you to report your progress, all right, someone who is there where you have to give an account of your activities of, you would tend to stay on track more. All right, accountability. So that's number one. Number two is reporting. So who do they need, or what do you need to report on? All right, so what are some of the stats, some of the activities which you have to report on? Right, so if you're looking to work on your fitness, your accountability person will most likely be your personal trainer, for example. Right, and then the reporting are things like your calorie consumption, some of the food items you have eaten for the day, how many times you have cheated in terms of your meals, how many times of the workout intensity and the workout duration. All right, so that is the things which you have to report on, the tangible items. All right, and then tracking. So how do you measure success, and how does success look like? Because if you don't know how success looks like for you, how do you know whether what you're doing is actually effective, or whether you're just going around in circles and looking busy instead of being productive? All right. So in terms of your success, it could be your target weight, right? Your target body mass index, or percentage fat count in your body, something like that. So you can have the equivalent stats from a business perspective, from a financial perspective, even. All right. So depending on the goals, whatever you want to achieve, these are some things which you can work on, so that we put ourselves in a position where we stay on track, right? So that if we drift away, we can course correct ourselves more easily, right? Okay, this one is my favorite part, building self-disruptive teams. All right, so how do you disrupt yourself? Because like I mentioned at the start of this session, it is always better to disrupt yourself and your team than to be disrupted by something or someone else. All right, and it's usually we have to choose between self-disruption or self-destruction. All right, so self-disruption is definitely easier, and it can be a fun activity as well. And I'm going to give us some tools and mental models which we can use. Right. So the first one is this thing called the S-curve. So for those of you in this room who have joined me for our previous resilience session, where we talk about how the individual can build up their resilience, you might be familiar with this S-curve. So for those who haven't joined us yet, this is how it looks like. All right. So pretty much whenever you're trying to do something new for the first time, we can map it out using the S-curve. Vertical axis is growth and performance. Horizontal axis is time. So whatever you're trying to learn or trying to get your hands on, whether it's a skill, a capability or a competency, it generally follows the S curve. All right. And there are three distinct stages within the S curve. The first phase is inexperience and infancy. All right. Imagine if you're learning how to drive a car. The infancy stage is when you sit in the driver's seat for the first time. You touch the steering wheel, you look at the knobs, you try to move the gear stick, you try to start the engine, you look at the dials, the indicators on the dashboard and all that. It looks very, very foreign to you. All right, everything feels funny. Okay, and then however, if you push on, you carry on with your lessons, um, you will go into the engagement and development phase. All right, so this is when things start to make a bit more sense. All right, you're moving on the road, you're changing gears, changing lanes, checking your blind spots and all that, getting into the swing of operating the vehicle, understanding traffic conditions and all. Right? And you can see here within pretty much the same period of time, there is a big jump in your growth. Right, so you're really getting into the swing of things, and then towards the end is where you enter the mastery or maturity phase. So you're really confident, you're really competent. It's almost second nature at this point of time. All right, so you can drive pretty much on autopilot. All right, so you can have a conversation with your instructor while you checking your mirrors, checking your blind spots, switching lanes, switching gears at the same time. All right, so that is when you've achieved that level of proficiency. Right, so pretty much the S curve. So the thing which so you can see with these lines here. So at the start, the growth is really, really marginal. All right, so you really got to be very patient with yourself, put in the hours, put in the effort and all that for very small gain, right? But if you persist, all right, if you continue to exercise discipline, then you start to get into the development phase where there's actually more visible and tangible growth. And then once you go into maturity, it starts to taper off. All right. So not much growth within pretty much the same period of time. But the thing which we have to be very, very careful of is when you are in your mastery phase, it is easy to get into complacency and stagnation. Even though things are really like second nature to you, things you're really competent, you're really confident, you feel like you own the game at this point of time. But the danger here is complacency and stagnation, because this is where you start to cut corners even. This is where you think that you are invincible, your business is invulnerable, nothing can shake your position and all that. And this is usually when people and companies start to take a downfall. All right. So how can we actually mitigate this? That is the next question. So the way to actually disrupt yourself is to literally put in a new S curve, right? So for the old S curve, where so the part where the old S curve ends is where the new S curve begins, right? So where the old S curve reaches maturity, that is where you start on the infancy phase of the next S curve. All right, so you pretty much you find something which you're not really competent in, so that you always maintain your competitive edge. Okay, so what this means is, so at the end of the day, what you want to do is this. So whenever you reach the phase whereby you're at the top of your game, you find the next thing to conquer, right? So that you're literally stacking your skills and your capabilities, going from one level to the next. So for instance, if your team, or if you're a marketing professional, or if you're managing a team of marketers, this is something which you could do. So everyone's really confident and they're doing well in their roles. So what you can do is to get some of them to take on the Google Analytics short course, right? Because that is a core skill set which is really relevant. And then once they have done that, then you can get them to go into copywriting. And then once they're comfortable with that, get them to go into consumer psychology. So you can see that you're stacking your capabilities, right? So that you're always going from strength to strength. And then if you're managing a team of investors or maybe like wealth advisors, so one thing which they might want to you guys could do is to start creating investment opportunities for youths. Maybe that is a new market which you can open up to, because young people are becoming more and more financially savvy. Um, they have more access to disposable income, and there's more financial resources readily available. So maybe that is a market which you can explore. And then the next thing you can go to is financial education and investments training. So once that is done, the next step you can go into is investment mindset and psychology. All right. So you can see all this are pretty much are very complementary skill sets, and they help you to enhance your core expertise. All right. So this is how you can use the S curve to help to disrupt your team. Right. So the question to ask is, what is your next S curve? So not just yourself individually, but also your team. So what is the next thing which your team can embark on? What is the next thing which you can start to work on? The next idea here is this thing called omni-functionality. I think this is a very cool term. So omni means all. So like omnipotent, omnipresent. Omnipresent, which means that you are present everywhere, or something is present, something is pretty much everywhere. So omnifunctional, it means that you are functional in all situations and all conditions. All right. So what this means is, if we look at individuals who are high performing, they are able to maintain a high level of performance in different states and conditions and circumstances. So for instance, a combat diver on a cruise ship is prepared for almost all scenarios. So for example, if you put a Navy SEAL on the Titanic, that Navy SEAL is okay whatever with whatever happens to the ship. All right. So if the ship arrives safely, they're fine. If the ship gets hijacked, they are fine. If the ship capsizes, they are fine. If they're being thrown overboard, they're fine, because they're trained for all situations. All right, whether they are on the boat, whether they are on the water, or whether they are underwater, they're trained for all circumstances. All right, an elite sports team is prepared for almost all scenarios. When it's raining, pouring, hailing, snowing, and all that, they're prepared for all weather conditions. When their morale is up or down, when they feel like it or not, when they feel on form or off form, they will still perform nevertheless. When they meet an opponent that is formidable or not, that is fine. When their fans support them on the day itself or not, they're fine. When they have the home ground advantage or not, they're fine. All right. A high performance driver is prepared for almost all scenarios. When they're driving in a straight line, when they're cruising along, when they're going through tight corners, all right, hairpin loops and all that, when they're driving on different road conditions, when they're controlling the vehicle at different speeds, and when they're driving through different weather conditions. All right, they can handle it, they are trained for it, they are prepared for it, they can even anticipate it. So nothing, not much can actually surprise them. So the question which you want to pose to your team, and to start to think about this, is your team able to thrive, function, and operate in different conditions? All right. So for example, if you're a teacher, can you teach your students when using different platforms, using different means? Can you engage your students in person? Can you engage your students in a large crowd? Can you engage your students in a small group? Can you engage your students virtually? Right? Because the more you're able to operate in different environments, you're actually becoming a very versatile and omni-functional professional. All right. And once you are able to handle young children, can you extend your capabilities to young adults or even mature learners, for instance? Okay. So, like, I was listening to a podcast, and they were saying that when the financial markets are doing really well, when the stock market is doing really well, everyone can be a financial guru. Everyone can be a financial expert when things are going well, all right? But when things turn around, that is when you see people's true colors, all right? So, so a high performing financial investor or a portfolio manager is someone who's able to grow your portfolio and to give you meaningful returns, whether the market is going upwards, sidewards, or downwards. All right, so they're pretty much able to operate in different conditions. Okay, so the question you want to ask yourself is, how can you create your team's omni functionality? All right. So what are some things which you can do? Yep. So I can see Richard's comment. So very relevant for teachers right now. I'm in school with seniors and online with juniors. Exactly. So um, so even for Richard's situation, when you're dealing with your target audience, in this case students, so how are you able to engage them in different conditions and different situations? All right, because if you put yourself in their shoes, they are learning from home, and learning from home, there are benefits as well as challenges. And if you're able to navigate that, you will become a much better teacher. So can you teach them? Can you engage them with different kinds of content? Bite-sized content, video content, audio content, um, verbal content, interactive content, game-based, gamified content even. So different things to engage your audience depending on their life stage, depending on their headspace and where they're at. All right. So the more you're able to understand this, the more you're able to work with the different variables, the more versatile and omni-functional you become.